The certified letter demanding $150,000 showed up the very same day I laid my father to rest. That's the exact moment those power-drunk HOA board members made the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. Picture this, it's 3 in the afternoon. I'm standing in my driveway, still in the black suit I wore to the funeral, shoes dusted with red cemetery soil. My throat burns with the metallic taste of fury as I unfold a notice, claiming I owe $250,000 for so-called violations on land my grandfather purchased back in 1952. Long before this subdivision even existed, the stench of diesel from a garbage truck barely covers the sickly sweet cloud of Karen Whitmore's perfume. As she glides across the street in her designer morning dress, her painted smile and forced sympathy drip from lips pumped full of Botox. Bad timing, Marcus. But rules are rules, she coos, handing me papers that threaten to wipe out everything 3 generations of my family worked for. But here's the thing Karen didn't realize. I wasn't just defending my workshop. I was about to uncover that I legally owned half of her precious neighborhood. So let me ask you, what would you do if some HOA Karen tried to snatch your family land while you were grieving? Drop your wildest revenge fantasy in the comments and tell me, where are you watching from? Do HOA letters in your area pull stunts like this too? Now, let me rewind and explain how this all began. Because without knowing my family's history, you can't fully appreciate just how epic Karen's downfall was destined to be. My name is Marcus Castellano. I'm 42, a third-generation contractor who inherited not only my father's construction company, but also the calloused hands and stubborn values that come with it. The land at the heart of this war, a 3-acre spread my grandfather, Antonio, bought in 1952 with $800 cash. Back then, nothing surrounded us but cornfields and grazing cattle. The house is modest, a 1,200 square foot ranch that's showing its age, but still strong as bedrock. What really matters is the workshop out back. That's where the crackle of my welding torch mixes with the crunch of gravel beneath steel-toed boots, carrying on traditions that have lasted more than 70 years. I just crawled out of a messy divorce, and my 16-year-old daughter Emma visits every other weekend. She's the center of my world, watching her learn to handle my grandfather's tools in the same workshop where he taught my dad. And my dad taught me that land isn't just property. It's legacy. It's worth every fight. Now, let me introduce the villain of this story. Karen Whitmore, 38. Once a pharmaceutical sales rep, she reinvented herself as a self-styled community leader after moving into Willowbrook Estates. 8 years ago, she's about 5'6" in expensive heels, with aggressively bleached hair that practically screams, "I need to speak with your manager." From across the block, you'll smell her before you see her. Her floral perfume hits like a toxic cloud. She lives in a 4,200 square foot colonial with a manicured lawn and an imported Italian fountain that probably cost more than my entire truck. Karen clawed her way into the HOA presidency with a cocktail of social manipulation, absentee neighbor, proxy votes, and weaponized passive aggression. She's the type who stabs you in the back while smiling, then acts shocked when you dare bleed on her rug. Here's the background. My family's land predates the whole subdivision by 50 years. Until 2003, we were still bordered by farmland. Then Hartwell Properties bought up to 100 acres and built 47 houses right around us. They even tried to buy my grandfather out for $400. Zero serious money at the time, but Grandpa refused. God bless his iron-willed Italian heart. When he passed in 1994, the land went to my father. As the new families settled into their picture-perfect suburbia, they grew more and more hostile about my so-called eyesore workshop. Never mind we were here first. Never mind that everything I run is fully legal and within city code. Every time I touch my grandfather's old surveyor tools, still sharp after 7 decades, I'm reminded that some things are worth protecting, no matter how unpopular. Karen's war started small. Noise complaints about me starting work at 7 a.m. Even though city rules allow construction at 6, she demanded I hide my equipment behind barriers to protect property values. She accused my business of attracting undesirable elements to her perfect little suburb. I knew exactly what that coded language meant, but at first, I ignored it. The harassment escalated. City inspectors showed up 6 times in 3 months, combing over my land for violations. They left empty-handed every single time. My work is clean, licensed, and by the book. But Karen wasn't done. The breaking point came with that $250,000 fine for so-called unauthorized structures and environmental damage. The letter landed in my hands the very morning I buried my father. I was still reeling from losing the man who taught me everything about honor and hard work when the HOA tried to crush me. And that's the exact moment this entire, glorious disaster began. Karen's opening move came stuffed inside a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. The notice inside claimed my workshop violated HOA covenants that, somehow, supposedly applied to land that existed long before her shiny subdivision was even a gleam in a developer's imagination. She demanded I immediately tear down what she called unpermitted structures. Among those so-called violations was my grandfather's original 1952 workshop back, when permits meant hunting licenses, not building paperwork. The threat was laid out in black and white, $500 fines every single day, plus attorney fees, with a 30-day deadline to comply. I could practically hear Karen's smug exhale from across the street as her printer spit out legal documents like it was running a harassment assembly line. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I'm not stupid either. While Karen likely toasted her brilliant strategy with an overpriced glass of Chardonnay, I was busy doing something radical, actual research, digging through my dad's meticulous filing cabinets. I found receipts from 1975, and there it was, the original property deed from 1952. Not a copy, the original, stamped with the county clerk's seal and signed in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Years ago, my contractor buddy Jake had warned me about situations like this when his own neighbor tried something similar. HOA covenants only apply if the property owner actually signed the agreement. My grandfather never signed anything because back then there was no HOA to sign with. Our deed predates Karen's subdivision by 51 years, standing in my father's office, the faint scent of his Old Spice still in the air. I swear I could feel his approval as I realized Karen had made a colossal legal mistake. But she wasn't satisfied with private threats. Oh no, Karen staged a full-blown safety meeting at the Willowbrook clubhouse. Picture 30 worried neighbors crammed inside while she ran a PowerPoint presentation called Protecting Our Community Values. She even created a Facebook group, Willowbrook Concerned Citizens, where she posted pictures of my workshop equipment with captions like industrial hazard in residential zone and property values at risk. And I'll give her this, her recruitment game was solid. She brought in Dr. Bradley Lucas, a cardiologist concerned about air quality, Susan Reeves, a grade school teacher fretting over child safety, and Tom Morrison, a bank manager who gravely lectured about mortgage impacts. Karen claimed my property attracted undesirable elements, and we all know exactly what that coded phrase was supposed to mean. My counterattack was straightforward: show up at the next HOA meeting with proof. So I walked into the clubhouse with Jake, our survey documents, and the original deed, spread everything out on the table, calmly explained the facts. Karen, predictably, waved it all away with a flick of her manicured hand, insisting my grandfather had somehow illegally exempted himself from community standards. The board obviously prepped beforehand, voted 4-1 to keep pushing enforcement. That's when I gave my first warning shot. Karen, you might want to double-check your legal footing before this gets very expensive for all of you. Meanwhile, while she thought her intimidation tactics were working, I was quietly documenting every incident, every false accusation, every petty stunt, building a case file Perry Mason himself would envy. My grandfather's workshop had seen 3 generations of honest work. Now it was about to witness Karen's downfall. Her response? Escalation. Classic Karen. She hired Davidson and Associates, a downtown firm with suits pricier than my truck and a $15,000 retainer, to send me a second notice demanding a property appraisal for forced sale. She even claimed the HOA had eminent domain authority, which told me everything I needed to know about her legal knowledge, or lack thereof. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about compliance. Karen was trying to steal my family's land by scaring me into submission, betting I couldn't afford the fight. What she didn't realize was that while she was busy playing checkers, I was about to introduce her to chess, and I'd been studying the board for 42 years. Her legal campaign ramped up like a Ferrari driven by a drunk teenager. Fast, expensive, and destined for a brick wall. Her attorney sent certified letters every week, each more absurd than the last, demanding property surveys, environmental studies, compliance reports fit for the EPA. Karen claimed my diesel storage broke federal law, conveniently ignoring that my 500-gallon tank was properly permitted and inspected every year. She filed zoning complaints, pushed neighborhood petitions, and even convinced 34 residents to sign a demand for my immediate relocation. The irony? They wanted to move out a family who'd been there decades before most of them were even born. So I went by the book, hired the best property rights lawyer I could afford. Enter Rebecca Santos, recommended by Jake's brother-in-law, who had dismantled an HOA nightmare in the next county. She specialized in exactly this mess. Her first advice was pure gold: document everything, trust nothing, and never let them see you sweat. So I installed security cameras, logged every harassment incident, and filed counterclaims for defamation and harassment. And I remembered something my father always said about bullies: sometimes the best defense is letting them swing so hard they end up punching themselves. Karen's next triumph was uncovering that the storage shed my grandfather added in 1998 technically lacked a permit, and she was right, kind of. He'd built it before those requirements really existed, but Karen treated it like she'd struck oil, practically skipping into the next HOA meeting to brag about her discovery. The city's code enforcement officer, Dave, a fair guy who'd worked with my dad for years, had no choice but to issue a violation notice. The fine came to $50,000, plus mandatory demolition, a serious hit. Enough to sting badly, but not enough to ruin me. Karen, of course, celebrated too early. At the next HOA meeting, she was already gloating, fantasizing about how she'd spend the attorney fees she thought she had in the bag. What she didn't realize was that I'd been quietly running my own investigation. Every night after work, I drove to the county recorder's office, combing through the basement, archives that reeked of dust, ink, and old disappointments. Under the flicker of buzzing fluorescent bulbs, I photocopied fragile documents that stretched all the way back to the 1940s. That's where the first crack in Karen's perfect picture appeared. The subdivision's original plat maps told an interesting tale. When Hartwell Properties developed Willowbrook Estates in 2003, their surveyor made what my old contractor buddy Pete would have called a big whoops. They had accidentally swallowed up 0.3 acres of my family's land in their development plan. Land they didn't own, couldn't sell, and had no legal right to touch. And it got better. Several houses in Karen's prized neighborhood were literally built partly on my property. The foundation at 1247 Maple Lane pushed 8 feet past my boundary. The garage at 1251 Maple jutted 12 feet into my lot. And the crown jewel, the HOA's beloved playground. It sat entirely on land my grandfather had been paying taxes on for half a century. But the rabbit hole went deeper. In an old cabinet, labeled Water Rights, 1950 to 1960. I uncovered a 1953 agreement granting my grandfather exclusive rights to the natural spring that supplied the whole area, every drop filling Karen's retention pond, every sprinkler keeping those manicured lawns lush in a drought, every gallon running through that absurd Italian fountain. All of it came from my spring. Karen had been trespassing on my water rights for 8 years, unknowingly. The irony tasted sweet. While she schemed to bankrupt me, she'd been stealing my water to maintain her perfect little suburban bubble. On Rebecca's advice, I kept all of this to myself. No premature moves, no tipping my hand. Instead, I quietly hired a professional survey team to map my entire property with GPS precision. Their findings matched the dusty county records exactly. 12 houses encroached on my land. The HOA's common area was, in truth, private property belonging to me. Even Karen's backyard gazebo crossed my line by 8 feet. The perfect twist, while she thought her permit violation crusade was closing in. I was sitting on leverage powerful enough to force half the neighborhood to shift their houses. But I wasn't ready to strike, not yet. Because the sweetest revenge comes from letting your enemy believe they're winning, right? Until the moment they realize they've been digging their own grave. Karen was about to discover the very costly difference between wishful thinking and property law. When Karen escalated her fight to federal agencies, it was like watching someone call an airstrike on their own position. She reported me to every authority with an acronym, accusing me of running an illegal business. I hazarded threatening the entire community, health department, fire department, zoning enforcement, even the EPA. She wanted every last one of them to rain bureaucratic fire down on my property. The inspection parade that followed was almost comedic, for separate agencies arrived within a week, clipboards in hand, hunting for violations that existed only in Karen's imagination. The fire marshal found my equipment safely stored, my workshop fully compliant. The health department found no contamination, no improper waste disposal, nothing. Zoning confirmed I was well within residential guidelines. The EPA inspector even praised my environmental compliance. Karen's reaction? She accused every inspector of corruption and demanded second-round inspections from state-level offices. Her breakdown at the city council meeting was like watching the final boss version of a Karen meltdown, every classic move, only louder and more desperate. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat me down with law books and explained something called adverse possession. It chilled me to the bone. If someone occupies your land for 20 years without challenge, they can legally claim it as their own. The clock had started ticking the moment Hartwell built those houses in 2003, and now we were dangerously close to that 20-year mark. As I ran my fingers across the worn leather covers of Rebecca's law books, she showed me case after case where owners had lost land simply because they didn't act in time. I had a small window to reclaim what was mine, but I needed to be strategic. Karen's next big move was a masterpiece of stupidity. She contacted Channel 8 News, setting up an interview with reporter Jessica Mills. Her spin, that she was the heroic HOA president protecting families and property values from my dangerous commercial operation. But the beautiful thing about truth is that it has a nasty habit of surfacing when you least expect. When Jessica arrived with her camera crew, I was prepared. I stayed calm. I didn't rant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give them the deranged homeowner footage Karen hoped for. Instead, I handed over documentation, my permits, my grandfather's deed, a timeline of harassment, and Rebecca's legal breakdown of the situation. Jessica was a real journalist, not just a talking head. She quickly recognized the difference between a sensational HOA feud and a genuine property rights story. The segment that aired wasn't zoning violation threatens neighborhood. It was HOA overreach when property rights collide with suburban expectations. Karen's rage at the biased coverage was priceless. She called the station, shrieking for retractions, claiming conspiracy. But here's where her escalation backfired completely. I had filed a public information request for the HOA's financial records. What I uncovered in those dusty cardboard boxes made her media tantrum look like child's play. The HOA had burned through $47.00 in legal fees fighting me, money siphoned from a special assessment, charged to every single homeowner. Karen had been funding her vendetta with her neighbors' wallets, and most of them had no clue. The smell of aged paper and betrayal hung heavy as I documented each expense, dollars, drained to feed Karen's ego and her attorney's pockets. Soon, neighbors began asking questions. Why were their quarterly assessments doubling? Where was the budget for road repairs and landscaping? The answers sat right there in Davidson and Associates billing statements. Hundreds of hours billed to destroy a neighbor whose only crime was existing before their subdivision was built. The real turning point came with a discovery that completely shattered Karen's legal standing, knocking it down like a fragile stack of cards. Buried deep in the HOA's incorporation records was a clause requiring the president to have lived in the community for at least a decade before taking office. Karen had only been in Willowbrook Estates for 8 years. That meant her presidency was never valid in the first place. Every vote she'd cast, every policy she'd pushed, every Legal action sheet approved, none of it counted under the HOA's own rules. Karen had been strutting around like a dictator in a game she wasn't even eligible to play. The woman who thought she could strip away my family's legacy with intimidation was about to learn that the law cuts both ways, and she'd been gripping the sharp end all along. The title search that flipped everything on its head cost me $847 and 3 weeks of waiting. But the information inside was worth more than Karen's oversized McMansion when the thick packet from Stoyart Title Company finally landed in my mailbox. I knew it held either my escape or my downfall. What I pulled out felt like Christmas morning for me and a nightmare dressed in paperwork for Karen. The title search, stretching back nearly a century, revealed something so stunning my contractor's brain could barely process it. Hartwell Properties had never secured the proper easements for road access to the subdivision. That meant every single homeowner in Willowbrook Estates had been driving across land that legally belonged to me. To put it in terms that would make any homeowner break into a cold sweat, those picturesque tree-lined streets winding through Karen's suburban paradise, that grand stone-columned entrance with the Willowbrook Estates sign, the entire road system connecting 47 homes to the outside world, all of it sat on my family's property without permission. The 1952 boundary survey was far more accurate than the 2003 developer survey, and the developer's surveyor had miscalculated by 12 feet. On the eastern boundary, that mistake spread across the whole subdivision like a virus in a spreadsheet, affecting 31 out of the 47 homes. My property wasn't just lines on paper, it included the HOA clubhouse, the community pool, and that prized main entrance Karen adored. When I laid the documents in front of Rebecca, she almost spilled her coffee. "Marcus," she whispered, "this isn't just a violation of your property rights. You literally hold the power to shut down an entire neighborhood." The financial impact was staggering. Tax records showed I'd been footing the bill on land other people were occupying. The county assessor agreed to re-examine the boundaries, which meant my neighbors would soon be staring at inflated tax bills. Insurance carriers would demand fresh surveys before renewing policies. Mortgage lenders were already being notified of disputes, and property values weren't just shaky, they were plummeting. Karen's panic was instant and predictable. She called an emergency HOA meeting, suddenly preaching compromise after months of legal threats. The arrogance and intimidation were gone. In their place stood a desperate woman dangling $75.00 for easement rights on land worth 10 times that figure. "This was just a mistake by the original developer," she pleaded, as if saying it repeatedly could make it true. "We can resolve this like good neighbors." But she had no idea the water rights bombshell was still waiting. My grandfather's 1953 agreement granted me full control over the natural spring, producing 50,000 gallons of water daily, the same source Karen's community was siphoning at a rate of 35,000 gallons each day to keep lawns green, and that unnecessary retention. Pond full, legally, I could turn off their water tomorrow. With summer drought approaching, those pristine lawns would turn into dry, patchy wastelands in weeks. The HOA now had two choices: cough up to $100.00 to drill new wells and install water systems, or negotiate fair compensation for decades of unauthorized use. Karen had burned $47.00 trying to break me with lawsuits and fabricated violations. Now she was staring down costs for times that just to deal with the water problem alone. Sitting in my grandfather's workshop, surrounded by the tools that had built 3 generations of honest work, I couldn't help but savor the irony. Karen had tried to bankrupt me. Instead, she gifted me enough leverage to bankrupt her entire neighborhood. Property rights, water rights, access control, and decades of trespass, all the cards were now in my hand. Karen's leadership reputation crumbled. Her allies jumped ship. The neighborhood she claimed to unify was splintering along financial fault lines. The same woman who threw legal threats in my face at my father's funeral was about to learn that karma doesn't always travel alone. Sometimes it shows up with reinforcements. Building the team to dismantle Karen's little empire felt like recruiting the Avengers if the Avengers specialized in property law and held grudges against HOA tyrants. Rebecca Santos was my legal anchor, a property attorney seasoned from years of battling developers and HOA bullies. She had a gift for simplifying complicated law, like when she explained easements. Picture your neighbor using your driveway every day for 8 years, then insisting they own it because you never stopped them. Jake Morrison, a surveyor, buddy of mine, became our technical expert. He read property maps like most people read grocery lists, and his GPS tools had pinpoint accuracy. He created detailed boundary maps proving exactly where the HOA had crossed the line. 12 houses, a clubhouse to roads, and a playground, all sitting neatly on my land. Eleanor Rodriguez, my accountant, ran the financial math that would make anyone's stomach churn. Her calculations put the HOA's exposure at $650,000 to $100,000 in legal defense, $300,000 in surveys and title insurance, and $150,000 for new water systems. My costs, barely $25,000 in legal fees and surveys. Sometimes the smartest offense is making the defense too expensive to maintain. Dave Kowalski, a contractor who'd worked with my dad for 15 years, documented every improvement my family had made. Together we photographed structures, cataloged equipment, and created a timeline of legitimate use and maintenance evidence that would be vital in court. Finally, Sarah Lucas, an environmental consultant recommended by Rebecca, brought scientific clarity to the water issue. Her report confirmed my spring's 50,000-gallon daily output, while the HOA was draining 35,000 gallons for irrigation, and that pond. Legally, no community use could happen without my permission. Rebecca outlined our legal playbook in terms I could follow: a quiet title action. That meant the court would settle every boundary issue. Once and for all, each affected neighbor would need to hire their own attorney and surveyor, costing them $15,000 to $25,000 apiece. Property disputes are brutally expensive for everyone except the party in the right. Elena uncovered the nuclear option. I could demand back rent for 8 years of land use, damages for stolen water, plus legal costs. The sums reached into the millions, but Sarah's water analysis gave us the cleanest leverage. Every drop feeding their sprinklers, every gallon filling that pond, every blade of grass kept green in summer was mine, and I could stop it all with a single decision. The evidence gathering was meticulous. Jake mapped every encroachment with GPS accuracy. Sarah tracked flow rates and calculated years of unauthorized use. Dave photographed structures that might need to be torn down. Rebecca filed the initial quiet title paperwork, putting all neighbors on official legal notice. Our psychological game was just as calculated. Rebecca's advice was clear: let Karen make the next aggressive move, while I stayed calm, collected, and collaborative in public. Each time she lashed out with threats or tantrums, I countered with quiet professionalism and hard evidence. The difference was crystal clear to anyone paying attention. Most nights, I worked on finding potential allies within the HOA, especially families frustrated by extra fees being demanded to bankroll Karen's personal legal crusade. More than a few neighbors had quietly expressed their support, tired of watching their mandatory dues squandered on what they rightly recognized as nothing more than a personal vendetta. The hum of my copier churning out legal filings became the soundtrack of justice. Media prep was another battlefield. Rebecca drilled me on interview skills, coaching me on how to keep the focus on property rights, legal precedent, and a fair resolution. We rehearsed composure under hostile questioning, knowing Karen's supporters would try to frame me as the unreasonable one. The mission was shaping public opinion, to make it obvious who was working towards solutions and who was fueling chaos. It all started coming together like a perfectly engineered build. We had the legal backbone, the technical know-how, the financial clarity, and the patience to let Karen's increasingly reckless decisions reveal her true colors. Sometimes the surest way to take down a bully is to hand them enough rope to destroy themselves. The woman who tried to steal my family's legacy was about to learn that preparation always beats desperation. Karen's spiral into full-blown panic was a case study in how not to handle defeat. She called a sudden HOA meeting, demanding $500 per household for what she theatrically labeled the fight for our community's future. standing at the podium in her power suit, her voice trembling with manufactured passion. She painted me as some kind of property rights extremist holding the neighborhood hostage. The backlash was immediate and brutal. 23 families flat out refused to hand over more money for what they knew was Karen's personal war. The Jenkins family demanded answers for why their quarterly fees had tripled. The Rodriguez family called for an audit of HOA spending. Even Dr. Lucas, once one of Karen's staunchest allies, publicly questioned why they were throwing good money after bad. The HOA board unraveled quickly. Two directors quit within a week, citing reckless spending and failed leadership. The few who stayed voted 3-2 to continue the legal battle, but their enthusiasm was evaporating fast, like dew under a scorching sun. That's when things crossed the line into criminal territory. Thank God I'd installed security cameras. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, the footage caught someone sabotaging my equipment. The images were sharp. Karen's husband, Dale Whitmore, slashing my truck tires with a utility knife, then spray painting move across my workshop door. He even looked straight into the camera, as if daring to be recognized. By 8 a.m. I'd filed a police report. Detective Rodriguez, who'd gone to school with my father, shook his head while reviewing the video. "Marcus, I've seen stupid, but this is weapons-grade stupid," he said. Dale was facing charges of criminal mischief, vandalism, maybe even harassment. Karen's defense was absurd. She claimed Dale had been investigating noise complaints and had every right to defend community standards. She even stood in her driveway screaming at reporters that the police were corrupt and biased in my favor. Watching her unravel in full HD with news cameras rolling, that's the kind of therapy you can't buy. I stayed measured. I filed for a restraining order against Dale and upgraded security with motion-activated lights bright enough to flood a football field. Every single harassment incident went into Rebecca's growing case file, setting the stage for a lawsuit that would make Karen's attorney bills look like pocket change. But Karen's biggest blunder was still ahead. City Councilman Roger Pike, a well-respected official who'd served our area for over a decade, got an unexpected visit. Karen marched into his office with a $10,000 campaign donation and a request: pressure zoning officials to condemn my property as a nuisance. Pike did what an honest politician should. He reported the attempted bribe to the district attorney and threw her out. Within hours, the local paper broke the corruption story. Suddenly, Karen's vendetta against me became secondary to her attempted manipulation of local government. Meanwhile, the HOA's finances were collapsing. Once flush with homeowner fees, their account was down to just $8,000 after blowing $63.00 on anti-Marcus legal battles. At a community meeting, Steve Peterson, the mild-mannered treasurer, went public with the financial records. The room erupted in chaos. Homeowners learned their dues had paid for endless attorney hours, investigators, consultants, and filing fees, all spent targeting a neighbor guilty of nothing more than living there. Before their subdivision existed, families threatened to sue the board for misuse of funds. The property management company, fed up with the drama, announced they would not be renewing their contract. Karen's last desperate gamble was filing an environmental complaint with the EPA, accusing me of contaminating groundwater with diesel storage. She had zero evidence, no scientific backing, just a false allegation. The EPA investigation dragged on 6 weeks and cost taxpayers thousands. The conclusion crushed Karen's credibility. Not only was there no contamination, but water tests confirmed my spring water was cleaner than most city supplies. The investigators weren't amused. Submitting false environmental claims is a federal crime, carrying serious penalties. And then came the twist that sealed her downfall. Channel 8 News, tipped off anonymously, dug into Karen's past. Reporter Jessica Mills uncovered that she'd been fired from her pharmaceutical sales job 3 years earlier for falsifying sales data and client reports. The woman who painted herself as a defender of community integrity had a well-documented past of professional deceit. HOA residents, who once trusted Karen to safeguard their property values, soon learned that their president was a proven liar, one who had been using their dues to bankroll her personal grudges. Within just 2 days, a petition demanding her resignation gathered 41 signatures. Even her closest allies began quietly backing away from her sinking ship. Meanwhile, Dale was charged with vandalism, and Karen herself faced potential federal prosecution for falsifying EPA reports. On top of mounting legal bills and public disgrace, their marriage was crumbling. The very couple who had tried to destroy my family's legacy were now dismantling their own lives. Sometimes karma doesn't require intervention, it only needs you to step aside. Karen's last desperate move was to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on me. Apparently, when intimidation tactics, vandalism, and attempted bribery fall flat, the next logical step is outright stalking. She spent $3,000 of her own money since the HOA coffers were empty on a bargain basement pie, who looked like he had learned detective work from binge-watching Netflix. Subtlety was not his strong suit. He stuck out like a neon sign in a library. Neighbors began calling to report a shady man in a beat-up Honda Civic, snapping photos of my property, tailing my truck, and asking odd questions about my business. Karen's desperation had reached the point of literally paying someone to harass me while she herself faced federal scrutiny over her EPA stunt. But her so-called criminal brilliance peaked with her next scheme, fabricating evidence. At 3:47 a.m. one Thursday, my security cameras caught someone dumping construction debris, chunks of concrete, rusted rebar, and paint cans onto my property. None of it came from my workshop. The culprit tried to stick to the shadows, but made one critical error. He was driving Tom Morrison's pickup truck. Tom, you'll recall, was Karen's banker ally from day one. Apparently, loyalty only goes so far when your leader asks you to commit a felony. Police arrested Tom within 6 hours. His confession came quicker than a NASCAR pit stop. Karen had convinced him this was community self-defense and promised to cover his legal fees if trouble arose. Spoiler, she didn't. Karen then escalated her smear campaign online. Anonymous social media accounts began attacking my construction business. Fake reviews appeared on Google, Yelp, and Angie's List, labeling me unstable, dangerous, and incompetent. She even posted my business number on Craigslist under bogus ads for free concrete removal and emergency plumbing services, flooding my voicemail with confused callers. Her harassment extended to my clients, somehow likely through her PIs. Shady methods. Karen obtained my customer list and began cold calling prospective clients, warning them against hiring a contractor under federal investigation. That part was a distortion of truth. Yes, the EPA had opened an inquiry, but it was into her false report, not me. Still, to potential contracts worth $15. Zero slipped through my fingers because of her lies, but every attack she launched only added fuel to Rebecca's defamation case. By then, we had enough documented harassment to bankroll Emma's college fund with lawsuit settlements. My quiet preparation during all this was like watching a chess master lining up pieces for checkmate. Rebecca filed lawsuits for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We subpoenaed Karen's phone records, internet history, and financial statements. Her organized harassment campaign was about to become Exhibit A. Then came the insurance bombshell nobody expected. Homeowner insurance companies, tipped off by title companies about boundary disputes, began reviewing policies. Several threatened to cancel coverage unless disputes were legally resolved. Property values. Karen's supposed crusade plummeted. Realtors began warning buyers about Willowbrook Estates, using terms like ongoing litigation, boundary disputes, and title defects. The very decline Karen swore she was preventing had become reality because of her actions. The neighborhood fell into chaos. Families who'd been friends for years stopped speaking. The annual block party was canceled. Kids were forbidden from playing with others whose parents had chosen the wrong side in the Marcus versus Karen feud. HOA board meetings required police presence just to keep order, as shouting matches erupted over every agenda item. Karen's circle of supporters shrank to only a few diehards clinging on out of sunk-cost stubbornness, rather than true belief. The rest of the community finally saw what I had known all along. Karen's war had never been about property values. or neighborhood pride. It was about power, control, and a narcissist's refusal to accept that she couldn't bully everyone into submission. My own approach was simple: host an informal barbecue. For any neighbor willing to listen, 18 families came. I calmly explained my legal position, never once attacking Karen personally. I offered fair market easement agreements, showed I was willing to cooperate, and proved I had never been the problem. Then the federal investigation escalated when the EPA handed Karen's false reporting case to the FBI, filing knowingly false environmental claims isn't just bureaucratic mischief, it's a federal crime punishable by $250,000 in fines and possible prison time. Dale, facing his own vandalism charges, struck a plea deal in record time, giving prosecutors evidence of Karen's harassment campaign. And then came the twist that shattered her remaining authority. While combing through HOA and corporation records, Rebecca uncovered that Karen had never met the residency requirement to serve as president. The bylaws mandated 10 years of residency, but Karen had only been in the neighborhood for 8 when elected. That meant her presidency was never valid. Every vote, every assessment, every legal move void. Her supporters scattered like roaches. When the lights flipped on, abandoning the woman who had dragged them into ruin, the taste of vindication was sweeter than justice served cold. The final showdown came at a packed town hall meeting with over 100 residents, dubbed by the local paper as the Willowbrook Showdown. Mayor Patricia Williams herself presided over the emergency session, acknowledging that this neighborhood feud had escalated into a full-blown community crisis. The civic center buzzed with tension, the atmosphere charged like the air before a thunderstorm. Reporters snapped photos, news crews from Channel 8 and the Tribune jostled for angles, and even a documentary film crew was there to capture it. This wasn't just about property lines anymore, it was about accountability, community leadership, and the fall of a petty tyrant. Karen spoke first. Her opening remarks dripped with desperation, thinly disguised as righteous anger. Dressed in a Navy power suit that couldn't conceal her gaunt figure and dark under-eye circles, she clutched the microphone like a lifeline and launched into what could only be described as a greatest hits reel of her delusions. I stand before you tonight representing law-abiding homeowners who simply want to preserve our family-friendly community, she began, her voice already trembling. With cracks, Marcus Castellano is a threat to everything this community has worked to create. His industrial venture disregards every principle of suburban living, and his refusal to follow even the most basic regulations shows utter contempt for his neighbors' rights. The crowd shifted uneasily as Karen recited grievances, complaints that had already been disproven months earlier. Several people interrupted, shouting corrections when she accused me of being under federal investigation, leaving out that the inquiry had been triggered by her own false CPA report. Her tone grew sharper and more frantic as she realized her neighbors weren't buying the act. When I walked up to the podium, the room hushed instantly, as quiet as a chapel. In my hands was a manila folder holding 70 years of records, while the big screen behind me displayed my grandfather's original 1950 deed, clear, sharp, and indisputable. Ladies and gentlemen, I began steadily, what you see here is the deed to the land my grandfather purchased when this area was nothing but cornfields. This predates every home in Willowbrook Estates by 51 years. I laid out surveyor maps, pointing to each property that overlapped with my land, the HOA clubhouse, the pool, the entrance, and a dozen houses, all sitting on land my family had legally owned since the Eisenhower years. I broke down the water rights issue in plain, simple terms. The spring that supplied their irrigation systems and retention pond belonged to me. I had been paying taxes on land the community used without permission for 8 years. Karen attempted to cut in with frantic objections, but Mayor Williams kept the proceedings orderly with strict parliamentary control. My evidence was overwhelming, documented, precise, impossible to refute. Then Rebecca presented her portion, a timeline of harassment. Security footage showed Dale vandalizing my property. Phone logs revealed Karen's relentless attempts to sabotage my business relationships. Police reports, EPA findings, and financial records detailing wasted HOA funds stacked up like a prosecutor's closing argument. Even Karen's loyal supporters looked shaken. And then came my final reveal. I could legally shut off your neighborhood's water supply tomorrow, I said, letting the silence draw out as Karen went pale. I could force every encroaching homeowner to move their houses at costs as high as $500,000 per family. I could demand 8 years of back rent for land you've been using illegally. The room froze. You could hear the weight of people breathing. But I won't, I continued, because I don't want to destroy this community. Instead, I'm offering fair easement agreements, formalized water rights, licensing, and a path forward that protects your investments while respecting my family's property. The room erupted in applause. Even some of Karen's allies clapped. Karen unraveled on the spot. She lunged back to the microphone, her voice cracking as she accused me of extortion, the mayor of favoritism, and half the council of corruption. Her makeup streaked down her face as she screamed about conspiracies and cover-ups. "This is a setup," she shrieked, spit flying. "They're protecting him so they can destroy property values and let commercial interests take over." Security had to remove her when she refused to stop. Cameras caught her still shouting as she was escorted out, while her own supporters averted their eyes in embarrassment. The next morning, her breakdown was plastered across the front page. Mayor Williams announced immediate mediation for the property dispute. Police Chief Davidson confirmed pending charges against Karen and Dale. The county attorney outlined possible federal prosecution for filing false environmental reports. The 3 HOA board members who showed up publicly apologized to me and to the community. As Karen tried sneaking out a side exit, angry neighbors confronted her, demanding refunds for the legal fees she had wasted. Homeowners whose insurance policies had been canceled because of her lies shouted questions she couldn't answer. Local news cameras recorded her fumbling, desperate attempts to shift the blame. The reckoning came swiftly. Emergency HOA elections were called within 30 days. Karen's supporters withdrew their backing. New candidates promised fiscal responsibility, transparency, and respect for residents. That evening, a sense of relief floated through Willowbrook Estates. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started talking again. Kids cautiously returned to playing together. The civil war Karen had ignited was over. Her grip on the community was finished. The legal negotiations took 6 weeks, but the outcome exceeded my expectations. Rebecca worked with the new, level-headed HOA board to establish formal easements. Fair compensation for land use and water rights totaled $85,000, paid through a special assessment that homeowners willingly supported once they understood the alternative lawsuits worth millions. Every property line was formally surveyed and recorded. Clear title insurance was issued. Mortgage restrictions lifted. Real estate values stabilized. The community Karen claimed to protect was finally safe from her. Her downfall was total. She was convicted of filing false environmental reports, 6 months of probation, community service, and $15,000 in fines. Dale took a plea deal for vandalism and divorced her, citing abuse and manipulation. Blacklisted in the pharmaceutical industry, she became unemployable. Within 3 months, she sold her mansion at a $40,000 loss just to escape the humiliation. The ornate Italian fountain she flaunted as a status symbol. The new owners tore it out immediately. Meanwhile, the community began to heal. The new HOA board, elected with record turnout, rewrote the bylaws. Financial transparency, officer term limits, and mandatory resident approval for large expenditures. I was invited to join as a community relations advisor, helping prevent disputes from spiraling into chaos. Our first project was reviving the annual neighborhood barbecue, this time in my backyard, with Emma helping flip burgers for 60 neighbors. Watching kids run across the same land Karen had tried to take from me felt like the sweetest victory of all. Laughter filled my house again, the first time since my father's passing. Emma, now 17 and preparing for college, told me, "Dad, you could have destroyed half the neighborhood, but instead you fixed it. Grandpa would be proud." In his workshop, surrounded by tools passed down through generations, I finally felt I had honored that legacy. My business grew from the positive publicity, with families across the county calling for consultations, surveys, and compliance reviews. I became an unexpected advocate for property rights, speaking at conferences and seminars about protecting homeowners from HOA abuse. The Property Rights Defense Fund I launched has already helped a dozen families fight similar battles, offering free consultations and workshops. Our annual Know Your Property Rights seminar now draws more than 200 attendees. Victories like this ripple outward, protecting families who come after us. The lessons are simple. Verify boundaries before you buy. Research HOA bylaws. Document every incident. Check your deed for water rights. And remember, bullies often destroy themselves. When you stay patient and strategic, this story proves why standing up to petty tyrants matters. Knowledge of the law, paired with persistence, beats intimidation. Communities can heal, even after bitter conflicts, on quiet nights. I visit my father's grave and share the victory with him. The faint memory of his Old Spice aftershave mixed with the air reminds me why some fights are worth it, not just for ourselves, but for the generations ahead. My grandfather's old survey tools now hang in the workshop, polished and ready for whoever carries the torch next. 3 generations safeguarded this land through depression, wars, and now a suburban tyrant. The legacy lives on stronger than ever. Tell us about your own HOA nightmare in the comments. We read every one and might feature your story next. These David versus Goliath battles are everywhere, and your experience could help someone else push back. And don't forget, subscribe and ring the bell, because our next story about a school board trying to silence a veteran mom who caught them stealing lunch money from special needs kids is one you do not want to miss. Thanks for tuning in to HOA Stories.